Good evening and welcome to another virtual Virtuoso with the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. I'm music director William Introligator, and joining me today is our wonderful principal timpanist Derek Sawyer. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks.
It's great having you on here, and you're the first musician from our percussion section to be featured. Percussion, of course, includes timpani, all the other kinds of percussion, as well as the keyboards. And it's actually kind of appropriate, I mentioned the keyboards, because as our principal timpanist, you were telling me that it would be kind of hard for you to perform on Virtuoso on timpani. So tell us what you've got in store for us this evening.
Sure. Well, technically, I'm playing a percussion instrument because piano is technically part of the percussion family. So it's a keyboard instrument. So I'll be playing 4 short pieces on piano. Actually, I recorded it down at my parents' house in Colorado Springs because they have a grand piano there. So can't fit one of those in my house currently. It sounds a lot better. So yeah, played 4 short pieces, and I've played piano from a very young age. So it's always been a huge part of my musical background, and I continue to play it just for fun and occasionally for others as well on a performance level.
That's fantastic. I wonder, how many orchestral timpanists out there, have that level of piano background. I mean, you were telling me before we were recording that you even considered majoring in piano performance in college. I think it's wonderful. I mean, my goodness, what another great aspect to your musicianship that you bring to your timpani playing. I'm sure it So did you grow up in Colorado Springs? Is that where you grew up? And
I did, yeah. I wasn't born there, but I lived there ever since I was about 1. So essentially grew up on the Front Range. Then I went to school up in Boulder, now I'm in Denver. So kind of lived along I-25 my whole life.
And how did you choose Denver? I mean, if you were in Boulder, obviously it wasn't too far to go to once you finished your degrees there. But was there something that drew you specifically to the Denver area?
Yeah, I mean, mostly jobs. I'm married. I've been married for about 3 years now, and my wife at the time, it was about 3 or 4 years ago. She got a great job at a nonprofit in Denver, and I also there's a lot of good. I actually majored in mechanical engineering as well at CU. I did a double major, and so my main job during the day is engineering, and actually in the construction industry as well. So yeah, I'm a busy guy, and music's kind of my main thing I do outside of work. But it's I love it. So.
Oh my goodness. So tell us about what degrees exactly did you get, and did you do your undergraduate as well as any graduate degrees from CU?
So I just did my undergrad. I got mechanical engineering at CU and then percussion performance. So I basically had no life in college. And it took me a couple extra years just to be able to get those. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's an intense doubling.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because so many people think that, music, oh, that was probably the easy major compared to engineering. I spent more time in the music school than I did in engineering school. I mean, I think people underestimate, how much work it is. And they think it's kind of a goof off major, but no, especially at CU, it's a good school. So.
Oh, it's a great school. Yeah. It's so funny because so many of our players in the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra went to CU Boulder. It's really amazing. So when you come up and play with us, is it a nice reunion with old classmates?
Yeah, I would say I probably don't play as much, just because of time constraints, compared to some of the other members of the symphony. So For me, it's a real joy just because this is my, I play with other groups, I'll sub, but this is the main group that I, am permanently a part of. And so, for me, it's never a chore, even to make the long drive up there. It's always super fun. So, and yeah, seeing, I played with a couple of them in college orchestra, or, met at other gigs elsewhere in the Front Range. So, yeah, it's always a joy.
Fantastic. Gosh, I'm really enjoying learning these other sides of you. I didn't even realize that you were a fine pianist, let alone having a degree in mechanical engineering and having that job during the day. That's fantastic. The things that you're modest, I guess, you just don't bring that up when we talk about things together at the Civic Center, either in rehearsal, or after a concert or something. We always talk about the music.
Well, that's more interesting really than mechanical engineering. So,
wow. And so having grown up in Colorado Springs, gone to school in Boulder, and now living in Denver, performing with us in Cheyenne, you've been with us for, what is it, about 5 years, right? Or 6?
Yeah, I think since 2014. So I think 5 full seasons. Yeah.
And there aren't a lot of orchestra timpani jobs available. So when the position opens up, a lot of people apply and audition, and it was exciting to have the the timpani audition that we had back then.
Yep.
And I still remember you were far and away a clear winner, and it was so impressive. And you've been a great part of the symphony ever since. So it's been wonderful. No, I guess I was going to ask about having been in this Front Range area most of your life. Then, do you also have the benefit of, like, maybe do your parents ever come up to Cheyenne to see a performance or anything like that?
Yeah, they're season ticket holders. They make the drive from the Springs all the time. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's super fun. I grew up going to the Colorado Springs Symphony, or Pikes Peak Philharmonic, as a kid occasionally, and that's kind of what got me in. So they go listen. They're avid, classical music fans. So my mom, she got her doctorate in piano and taught in college and now, privately. So that's kind of where I learned it. And so I grew up around it. They support me really well, and always, they love to come and hear me. So it's great.
Well, a big shout out to Derek's mom and dad. Thank you guys for raising such a great man, and also for making music so important when he was young, and for supporting the Cheyenne Symphony by being season ticket holders. Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That is really neat. I don't know how many of our symphony players get to have that really special connection of having their parents in the audience for every performance that they're in. That's pretty neat. So tell us a little bit about your piano playing. Did you start with your mom as your teacher, or you said you started from about the time you were in kindergarten, right?
Yeah, so I think, it was right before I started kindergarten. She actually, it's funny, so my mom, she's definitely the musical one in the family. That's what her career is in. It's funny, my dad's in engineering, so I guess you could say I'm a little bit of a product of both of them. Yeah, so my mom, she taught so I'm the youngest of 4. She taught all of us piano, made us go from, when we were able to start around kindergarten all the way till 8th grade. And then starting in school, we also had to pick another instrument and go to 8th grade. And then we could choose, after 8th grade, you can choose one instrument and do that in high school. And I chose to keep on doing both because I just loved it. So for me, it was never too much of a chore. But yeah, so I started with piano. Actually, in 6th grade, I started trumpet because my brother actually was a really good trumpet player. And I was like, oh, I want to be like my brother and play trumpet, but I was terrible. I, couldn't hold my breath for more than 5 to 10 seconds. So it never panned out. And so in 8th grade, I switched over to percussion. Got a teacher down in the Springs who was really great. And that, percussion is an instrument that if you already know piano, it's a lot easier to start, because it's with your hands. um, especially keyboard instruments, right? Playing xylophone, it's kind of like playing piano, but with 2 fingers instead of 10. So,
Yeah.
that really helped me be able to kind of get a head start on percussion when I started
Most
that.
definitely. Yeah. That's so great. So you've selected 4 different piano pieces to play for us this evening. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the first one?
Sure. So the first one, it's ironic because the orchestra in October is playing a orchestra arrangement of the whole suite, but it's the prelude to the Holberg Suite by Grieg. Um, so it's actually the whole suite. It's a set of it's kind of Grieg was in the Romantic era in the mid to the late 1800s, I'm guessing, and so he wrote this to commemorate, I think it was the 200th anniversary of a playwright, a famous Danish playwright. His last name is Holberg. I don't know his first name, but I think it was commemorating. I think that guy lived in, I think, the 1600s, 1700s. So
Even earlier, I'm trying to remember. I've got my score because I'm, like you said,
yeah, you tell me.
for our concert on October 17th. The Holberg Suite will be featured. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. So yeah, it's supposed to be from Ludwig Holberg's time, and he was, yeah, you're right. He lived 1684 to 1754. He was known as the Moliere of the North. That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, the piece it was dedicated to him. I think he must have been well known at the time, and it's kind of written in the style, or not the style, the structure of pieces, Baroque pieces back in that era. So you have a sarabande and a gavotte and a preludum. So those are dances
Yeah,
structured at that time, but it's kind of, so it's a mix, of Baroque style and Romanticism style.
it is.
Um,
Yeah.
so
There's definitely Baroque style in there, though. There's all these like fancy little trills and lifts and all sorts of stylistic things from that era. And you're
yeah.
right. It's a beautiful kind of romantic vision of Baroque music and
Mhm.
sort of like, in a way, what Stravinsky did with his Pulcinella ballet, where he was trying
Yeah.
to bring fashion style. And that wasn't, a contemporary style. And that same thing happened with Grieg here and created this masterpiece. And one of the things that you were sharing with me before we started recording was I didn't realize that it actually started as a piano piece. And
I believe so, yeah.
piece that many of us know. I mean, it's just for strings, but it's a string orchestra piece. Yeah.
Yeah, it's slightly different. I noticed because I actually had never heard the string version of it until I realized you guys were playing it. And so a couple weeks ago, I listened. I'm like, oh, this actually kind of makes more sense. The orchestra, it sounds more like a dance, right? The strings at the beginning are going dun 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 instead of the piano part goes dun 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 dun. So
Right.
it's more of a dance feel. And so knowing that, I tried to play a little more dance like with
Oh, that's
the
great.
piano, just because that's kind of what it's it's essentially a dance. So
Right, exactly. Well, wonderful. We'll cut right into it now. And this is Derek Sawyer performing Grieg's Prelude from the Holberg Suite. Enjoy. Bravo, Derek. Like most of these, we've recording the interview beforehand, and I haven't heard it yet, but I'm so excited to hear you perform that great. And bravo in advance. I'm sure it was a great performance. And tell us a little bit about what else you have in store for us on piano this evening.
Yeah, so the second actually set of pieces are two nocturnes by Chopin, Frederick Chopin.
My favorites. I love Chopin nocturnes.
Yeah, it really is. It's like whenever I'm stressed and just need to go let it out on the piano, I just go open the nocturnes and pick one and that I played before, because they're not easy. I definitely had to practice a lot of these and learned them over time, and then the muscle memory kind of helps bring it back. So so 19 in E minor and 20 I believe in C sharp minor. They're actually both published after he died. So I think I know 20 and 21, those are the last two. I think 19 was as well. And yeah, they're both extremely beautiful pieces. Just like any of the nocturnes, they have just gorgeous melodies that you can sing along to, and are, one thing I love about Chopin is he'll do a melody in the beginning, kind of the simple version of it, and then when it comes back, he'll have really extravagant, flourishes that kind of, they're not like, they don't distract, they kind of complement the melody, but they're just beautiful ornamentations of it. So that happens in both of them. I guess the 19 mostly. And then 20, actually, I heard the first time when I watched the movie The Pianist, but with Adrian Brody, and that was one of the ones he played, and I'm like, oh, it actually is a little easier. And I was like, I should just go learn that. So anything by Chopin is pretty amazing when it comes to piano, I think.
It is so true.
He didn't write much for orchestra, but his piano music is pretty amazing.
It is, yeah. I'm not a great pianist, but I do enjoy playing, and ever since the lockdown and COVID, it's been had a lot more time, and so I've been playing every day.
That's awesome.
And I've always loved the famous E flat nocturne, which is one of the most famous. The F minor is one of my all-time favorites. There's so many great ones.
They really are amazing.
I pulled out my score. And I was just curious, because you're right that both 19 and 20 were published after he died, so they were posthumous. And I was curious, like, when they were written. And my edition mentions that for 19, they're not sure, but they think it was in 1827. So it's a pretty early piece.
Yeah.
Minor. And then for the C sharp minor, they think it was 1847 to 1848 that it was written.
Mm-hmm.
So those are absolutely gorgeous pieces. And I mean, again, another testament to your, quite your virtuosic skill level on piano, which is coming as kind of a surprise to probably many of us watching tonight, who think of you as our outstanding timpanist in the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. It's just fantastic. I was going to say, as a timpanist, much like the string players in the orchestra who have to find the pitch for every note, the timpanist has to do that as well. And you have the pedals to adjust the pitches of the timpani drums, and I'm sure there are guidelines there, for the pedaling, but very much unlike the piano, you do have to find the exact tuning of every note every time you play it. And how was that adjustment? Did you, like when you were getting focused really seriously on orchestral percussion and timpani, was that a challenge at all for you, or did that come naturally?
It was a challenge. I mean, I think it's always a challenge for anyone learning timpani initially. It's one of those things that nobody's just naturally gifted necessarily with it. I think one thing that did help from piano is that playing so much music as a kid and through high school and into college, you get a sense for what those intervals, because really in timpani, whenever you tune, you're tuning an interval. You're usually either, whether you're tuning off the orchestra's pitch, which I'll do during a concert, or a tuning fork or whatever, that's really where it comes into play. So when you can hear the interval correctly. So part of, playing piano, you can in your head think of it just because of, oh yeah, a perfect fourth, I can da da, you can always hear it in your head. It's that really helped, right? If I didn't have the piano background, I might not have been as solid at that. But obviously understanding how the drums produce the pitch. Every timpani set is different in terms of the pedal, and even so, our new set of timpani, actually, it's really nice. They have a hand fine tuner as well, and so that it's like much more incremental, and you can really focus in on the pitch. So that is also a factor. So it kind of is just one of those things where you get, as experience you go through, you can really learn to know how each drum acts itself, and that kind of allows you to understand the pitch a little better.
That is so fantastic. Wow. Well, let's get right into the Chopin. I'm so excited to hear you perform these, and I love the Chopin nocturnes. There's like some of my all-time favorite pieces. So when you told me you were performing two of them, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so great.
Yeah.
So this is Derek Sawyer performing the Chopin Nocturnes 19 and 20, E minor and C minor, both opus posthumous. Enjoy. Bravo, Derek. I'm so excited to hear you perform these Chopin nocturnes, and thank you for those performances. We were just talking a little bit off of the recording about how important timpani is in the orchestra, and how if we can just take a few minutes, even though you're giving us a beautiful piano recital tonight, but just to help our audiences, especially those who are not trained, orchestral musicians. Many of our audiences in Cheyenne, they may not appreciate and understand just how important the role of the timpani is in a symphony orchestra. From my perspective as a conductor, you and I, you know, have to be so much in sync and just so like
Yeah.
very much together that I kind of feel like you're almost like the second conductor in the orchestra,
Right.
not just laying down the beat in many cases, but also the pitch in many cases. And timpani drums have the quality of, I like to think of the timpani drums as having this quality of being both the loudest and softest instrument in the orchestra, both
Yeah.
extreme.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize that. I mean, in some respects, there's a lot of modern, you know, technological innovations to these tuned, big, beautiful, resonant drums, but they go back and like in historically, they are like besides strings and maybe oboes and French horns, timpani was like the next instrument introduced in the orchestra. So there's like so much orchestral repertoire with timpani. But that's just me gushing. Tell us what, as our timpanist, tell us how you feel about it. What makes it special? What kind of special role do you feel you play in the
Sure.
Symphony?
Well, you took away like two of my main points.
Oh,
That it's
sorry.
not no, it's we're often called the second conductor. I think part of that is just because so visually when I hit the drum, most people in the orchestra can, a lot of people can see that, except the people directly in front of me, right? So, part of playing together, especially during COVID, where you're a little further apart, it really helps to have that visual cue. Like in the same way, the concert master, they really exaggerate their movement to help. And for me, visually, that helps me line up because sometimes we're, with distance, it's if we played if I play when I hear it, I'll be a little late, right? So I always try to focus on being kind of the first sound I hear without being early, that's honestly probably the hardest part of playing timpani, in my opinion, with a group. And I guess really any instrument has to deal with that too. But so that, that's a huge part of it. Like you said, being the loudest and being able to be the softest. And it's fun because in all of classical repertoire, there's a lot of those extremes. There's beautiful, the timpani can be so beautiful and you know very soft but full sound, and then it can be massive and just dominate the whole landscape, right? When a timpani roll is going, it's like a triple forte on trombone. It's just like,
Yes.
right, takes
Right.
over the whole sound. And um, often when a conductor has timpani playing, it's for a purpose, right? It's not just to fill, it's to be that extra layer that comes through or provides depth, right? And so that it's kind of filling out the orchestra sound, which like if you just played a piece without timpani that was supposed to have timpani on it, you would know because it just doesn't feel right. You might not say, oh, I can't hear that melody, but you could just tell it's not as intense as it should be, or it's not as full. So that to me, that's what one of the most fun parts of playing timpani is that when you play it, you can really feel it, right? Especially when you're right over the drums, it literally vibrates through your body sometimes. So
Yeah, and it vibrates the whole room. It goes through the floor and into the like the rest of the stage and out into the audience, and you can
yeah,
definitely feel it. I love this conversation. It reminds me of when you did audition. I mentioned it earlier, but the timpani audition is interesting because there's technical passages that we ask you to play, and then musical things. But it's also a matter of the sound, isn't it? Like sometimes you have to have a sort of ping to the sound, and choosing the right mallet is sometimes a big part of that. Even the type of drum head is sometimes part of that. I know the timpani players will sometimes switch out to the old-fashioned lambskin drum heads versus the ones that are kind of hybrid or just plastic. And tell us a little bit about that. As a timpanist, do you use a wide variety of drumsticks? I know that, was it Berlioz was the first composer to write it in the part, I think.
Yeah, he would specify, I want, a mallet with this type of head on it or something like that. I think before him there were, he might have been the first actually. Like Symphony Fantastique has very specific instructions, which is pretty rare even.
Head or sponge head, and then
yeah,
later pieces by Berlioz had, I think, other kinds of things.
Yeah.
Too, yeah. But the old timpani drums, like from the classical era or even Baroque era, did they all just use wooden mallets? There was no.
Pretty much, yeah. That's so traditionally. Take a step back. Timpani were originally used actually as like war drums on horses. So like going back to, I think, and I don't know exactly where, but I think in Turkey, kind of that area, they were used. I probably dating early as back, 1400s, that kind of thing. But then they were introduced in, starting in the Baroque era, like with Handel and Bach. There's a little bit of timpani, right? And then Beethoven really kind of took it from there, and Beethoven's like, just from a timpani player's perspective, you never insult Beethoven because he wrote such good timpani parts, and he wrote it like as another section of the orchestra in a way. Which
Absolutely, is really cool. Yes. I remember when I was still a sort of an apprentice conductor, and I was working with this German orchestra, the Southwest German Radio Orchestra. One of the first things I was working with them with, well, I guess it was like they were doing a recording project of all the Beethoven symphonies. So I was like the assistant conductor in the sound booth and stuff. And I just couldn't get over the fact that they were started with the first symphony of Beethoven. And I was like, this piece is like a timpani concerto. It's unbelievable. There's so much important timpani, and never before, I think, had there been so much importance. No, I don't think ever before that.
No.
Such importance given to the timpani. And then, of course, Berlioz took it a step farther with things like the March to the Scaffold and the Thunder and the tuned drums and Symphony Fantastique. But it is such an amazing instrument. It's so, so great. Yeah.
So just to answer your question before, it was kind of in the Baroque, early classical era, you mostly just had two drums that did not have pedals, right? So they just would have been the copper bowls with usually a goat skin.
Oh. Okay.
It was actually a very different sound, and like some of the best orchestras in the world, they'll have one of those antique sets, and they put goat skin and they'll play them with wood mallets, and it gives this different sound, and a little more muted, but I don't know, it's one of those things you just kind of have to hear. And so that kind of evolved. Beethoven started writing for more than two drums, but we didn't really get pedals until, kind of around the Mahler time. A lot of classical repertoire actually isn't that difficult technically on timpani, in terms of the amount of notes. Like Bartók's Concerto for the Orchestra is probably the main big classical piece that is like, you have to be able to pedal and play at the same time and stuff like that. But for the most part, you're playing, the tonic, the subdominant, the dominant, like it's pretty predictable, but it still adds so much, to the sound of the orchestra. So.
And then there's the whole issue that because those drums only had two pitches from the time of Bach all the way up to early Beethoven, there's the issue that sometimes the pitch that's written is not in the chord, and that's a whole nother aspect to timpani playing. Having that conversation with the conductor. Do you want me to play what the basses have? Do you want me to, and sometimes the note is kind of in the chord, but not exactly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily want it in the bass, but to be more authentic, maybe we play it as written, or maybe we do make the change. And there's all sorts of things like that, right?
Yeah, that's kind of where you have to get creative, and there's so many different schools of thought on that within the timpani playing world, but it's cool because it's kind of like this investigative, approach where you have to go look in the score. You think about, the technology of the time, and well, if he had this, he probably would have written this. So
Yeah,
it's kind of one of those things that you can kind of put your own personal touch on it, or along with the conductor as well. That it gives you a little bit of flexibility if you want to. Some conductors are very, you play what's written, and some are more adventurous and saying, yeah, let's add this here. And
right.
so that's one thing I've always appreciated about you. I can come up and say, hey, what about like playing an F right here? And you're like, oh yeah, let's try that. And so it's kind of one of those ways that you can get creative where
Yeah,
you,
definitely.
normally wouldn't be able to. So
Well, another aspect that I've always been so impressed with your playing, Derek, is that, and a lot of people may not realize this too, and I'm sorry to keep going on and on about timpani, but as you can tell, I love the instrument.
yeah,
But one of the things that is a whole nother art form for a timpanist is that for a lot of the earlier pieces, from Beethoven earlier, let's say, the note durations that he gives you are not necessarily the note durations that you will necessarily always play. For instance, sometimes he'll have a half note or a whole note, or even a quarter note and a quarter rest, but you'll be sort of with the trumpets who might have a different note duration specified. And
yeah,
so a whole part of the art is also figuring out how long to let it ring. If it's, let's say if it's not a roll, but how long to let the notes ring before you dampen it. Dampening the timpani is a whole huge aspect of timpani playing. And when it stops ringing is a whole, that's a whole art form in it to itself. Tell us a little bit about that, and if that's been a challenge or a delight or what. Tell us a
sure.
little more from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's huge. That's, often like in Beethoven, you are playing with the trumpets, and so you would want to kind of usually match what they're doing, but it kind of depends on the part of the piece. And that's another one of those creative choices that, hey, the whole orchestra is really loud after you play this quarter note. So I'll usually let it ring because it kind of fills the sound in more, especially like on our new set, they ring a lot. They're really it's impressive how much the pitch sustains, which is great for a lot of parts. But sometimes, if it's staccato, I have to like choke the drum right after I play it, right? With both
Right.
hands, like muting it so there's no sound. And that sometimes that with ringing drums, that's actually pretty hard because you have to you don't want to make a noise when you dampen it. So there's
Right.
actually a technique to kind of, you know, um, kind of sliding, not hitting your whole hand at once, but kind of rolling your fingers on the drum. And that kind of, it takes the sound away without sounding like a note.
Right.
And so particularly in timpani auditions, that's tricky because you're the only, person playing. And so it's kind of obvious when you're dampening, right?
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
but
that's
it
a
could
good
be
part of
very
it.
obvious if the whole orchestra is suddenly silent, and if you hear it ringing through,
Yeah.
you're like, oh no, I need you to dampen
Yeah.
it. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's like so hard and so fast to play and dampen it right away. Sometimes, that's tricky.
Yeah.
Um, what about the mallets? Do you, I mean, like all timpanists, you have a variety of mallets that you use. Maybe some of the non-musicians in our audience might be curious about why
Mhm.
you have set up like 5 or 6 pairs of mallets when you perform with us. Tell us a little bit about that.
They all produce very different sounds. And I mean, if you listened, if I just played each mallet in a row, you'd say, whoa, it sounds like a different instrument almost, right? If I have a wood mallet, which is kind of on the very extreme end of being really hard, right? I actually don't have that many mallets compared to a lot of timpanists. Some people have 50 mallets in their bag, right?
Well, a lot of them will make them themselves, and they'll like pick at the
Yeah,
felts, make all.
I don't do that. It's a lot. It's really tedious, but yeah, there's a lot of range of mallets. Wood is kind of on one extreme, and then there's a lot of amount of felt you can put on. The really poofy ones are on the other extreme, and really it determines the amount of attack that you want compared to the amount of the pitch you can hear and sustain when you hit the drum. So the wood, it's gonna sound more like a snare drum almost, or a bass drum, right? You hear the attack, and so like for the planets, Mars, right? Usually that's a very dun 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 dun. It's kind of, you're playing with the snare drum, and it should sound very percussive, right? And then when you play, I don't know, trying to think of there's a lot of places where you would play
Well, there are
normal.
some places where you have to switch right away from playing
Yeah,
really hard to suddenly
yeah,
having to roll. And that's like, if there's not enough time to switch mallets, that can be a very, very difficult thing.
yeah. Well, fortunately, there's some. I have some mallets that are two-sided, so I have kind of like, and that's kind of more. I don't know, past 30 years, they've kind of developed that more, and so I can just I don't have to actually flip. It kind of gives me a little more time, but
Yeah, right.
yeah, that's a challenge too.
Yeah, and that tell our audiences what hot rods are.
Hot rods. Well, those are more for drum set, right? Where you
Yeah.
have they're bundle sticks basically, where you have a bunch of little wooden dowels connected in a pattern, and it's interesting in kind of more modern music. Like I played in college, and also, I mean, even John Williams, some other more modern pieces. It'll call for crazy stuff on the timpani, right? Like I think composers really realize how what you can do. Like I've played where you have a cymbal upside down on the timpani and you roll on the cymbal and it creates this really interesting
Yeah.
effect. You can use timpani for a lot of effects, sometimes playing. And even there's kind of a tradition of some pieces where timpanists will get creative where sometimes they'll even roll as a normal snare drum roll. So when I roll on timpani, I don't roll like snare drum where you're doing double bounces. I'm just doing a single stroke roll typically, but there's some pieces. I'm trying to remember the exact uh, one, but there's a couple where they'll even put coins on the drum. And it's just like there's a lot of interesting things you can do. It's all about getting the sound you want. That's really what timpani is about. And so whatever you have to do to get that sound, it's kind of like nothing's off limits. So
Right. Oh my goodness. This has been so fun to talk about. Now we should switch gears and
yeah,
introduce
probably.
the piano piece.
Yeah.
This has been fascinating. Thank you so much, Derek.
Yeah, you're welcome. So yeah, the last piece I'm playing, it's kind of a good segue. It's much more percussive than the first two. It's Toccata in E minor by R.M. Khachaturian, who is a 20th century composer. It's very 20th century in its tonality. You've got when you listen to it, you'll hear, oh wow, this sounds like more like Bartok, but he's actually an Armenian. He's of Armenian ethnicity, and so. But I think he was in the Soviet Union essentially for most of his life. So he's a very celebrated Soviet composer, actually. It has kind of a legacy of that, but he was a little overshadowed by Shostakovich and Prokofiev and kind of some of the other giants of the 20th century. So he's a lot less well known, but wrote some really amazing, mostly ballet and orchestra music. But this piece in particular is just, it's always been one of my favorites. Yeah. So yeah, it's, I don't really know much about the history.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was saying I don't know much about the history of the piece. I've researched it. It's kind of, it was written earlier on in his career, and it's but you probably know more about Khachaturian himself. So
Well, and I don't know the piece at all, so I'm excited to hear it. I don't know if maybe I'll recognize it when you start playing it, but I don't know his toccata. But I was going to say a lot of our audiences and people watching, when they think of Khachaturian, they think of his most famous piece, which is the Saber Dance. And like you said, when you described his toccata, a lot of percussiveness, and that Saber Dance is a lot like a lot of his music, has a sort of splashy color, exciting, rhythmic drive,
yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited to hear this. We were talking before we were recording that we've done the Khachaturian violin concerto in both of its versions. Before my time with the Cheyenne Symphony, I believe they did the violin concerto, maybe even with Stacy, our concertmaster, as soloist. And then about, I don't know, 7 years ago or so, we did the flute version of the Khachaturian violin concerto with Ismael Reyes, our principal flute player. And so, yeah, Khachaturian, such great melodies, exciting rhythms, very, like you said, percussive and driving. I'm excited to hear this toccata.
Yeah.
Maybe in the style of Grieg, making nice bookends to your piano recital here. You've got a 20th century composer writing a toccata, which sounds very much like a Baroque piece. So maybe he's
Mhm.
trying to, also give an homage to that era, like Grieg did with the Holberg
Yeah,
sonatas.
yeah.
Nice programming there. Anything else you want to tell us about the Cacciatorian before we segue into it?
No, it's a fun piece, so enjoy.
Yeah. Is it one that you learned when you were younger, or is that one you learned
Uh,
in?
it's a little more technical. I mean, just I learned it probably at the end of high school, and I kind of continued playing it through college.
Yeah,
It's one of those that sounds really hard, but it's not. It kind of works on piano very well.
sure.
I mean, obviously you have to have technical ability. It's very fast, but it all kind of naturally is very friendly to the piano player. So
Wow. Well, I don't know how you're prepared this whole piano recital at the same time as having your, full-time job in engineering and construction, and also all your timpani work and things of that nature. I mean, you must be one of those, very high achieving type A type of people.
well, to be fair, timpani's kind of slowed down. Really just the one concert or the concerts in August, September. But yeah, I mean, piano is one of those things that, and this is a testament to my mom because she very much drilled into me as a kid. If you practice 30 minutes a day, every day, that goes a long way compared to doing 3 hours once a week, right?
Yes.
And so that really having that foundation, it's one of those things where I play, I don't play as much as I used to, but it's still there just because I had that, 10,000 hours, whatever you want to call it, growing up as a kid, just the consistent practice, right? And that totally is a testament to my mother. So,
Oh,
that's, that, and I try to translate that to timpani as well. It's a great way to learn anything. So,
absolutely. Well, again, thanks, Mom.
thank
And to a lot of our musicians, it's thanks to our parents who got us to practice and taught us the discipline and, so much of that,
you.
shared the love of it with us. All right, here's Derek Sawyer performing Aram Khachaturian's Toccata. Enjoy. Bravo again, Derek. It's been so nice getting to know you personally as well as musically, this other side of you, your piano playing, and this is,
Mhm.
you've been so generous playing so many beautiful pieces tonight for us. So bravo and thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I wanted to also mention that I was really glad that shortly after you joined us with the Cheyenne Symphony back in 2014 or so, we were saying, you brought to our attention that you felt like the set of timpani drums that we were using and had been using for many years, maybe about a decade, was maybe not on par with the level of the orchestra. And I had not realized that. Tell us a little bit about this. And a few times over our conversation tonight, you've mentioned our new timpani, and I wanted to sort of segue into that, and you can and just sort of share with us the story about how how that all happened.
Yeah, it was a long process. I mean, as many people might not realize that timpani are very expensive, especially there is a difference, at least to the conductor, and I think all the musicians would agree in the orchestra. Maybe the audience, if you are, not familiar with orchestra music as much, it might not be as big of a difference, but our old timpani, they're fine for high school or even college practice drums, I'd say. I mean, they're probably a half the price of our new ones, and that I just it was one thing where I knew right. It's not like I'm going to come in and say, hey, we need a new set of drums right now. It's one of those it takes a long time to figure out the stars kind of have to align sort of thing in terms of getting money for it, plus finding the right set. And so yeah, I mean, the old set, it works. It's not like you can't play on it. It just they don't have fine tuners on them, which makes it harder to get the exact pitch. The best way to describe it is the new set of drums. The pitch is very centered or focused. You can really it almost sounds more like an actual instrument because you can hear the tone like a trumpet.
Yes.
Whereas the old ones might have been a little more washy and less, more of a bass drum sound than
Yeah.
an instrument sound. So yeah, I'm very grateful to all the people who
Yeah.
contributed to allowing the symphony, and I feel like I got lucky because it happened right before COVID, and that probably wouldn't have been able to do that this year. So
Well,
feel very very fortunate.
like you said, it took years, but
Yeah.
first you bringing it to our attention, and then us trying to figure out how are we going to be able to afford a new set of drums. It's not like we've been saving up every month for it.
Yeah.
um, and they, like you said, they can be very expensive. So we had these little stopgap measures. We thought, well, why don't we give them some new drum heads? That might
Yeah.
help. Okay, we'll try these different drum heads. That might really help the sound and everything. Well, yeah, but it still didn't, do
Yeah.
the right thing. And I really want to thank our board of directors for their support
Absolutely.
in this, for their generosity, their buying into yours and my vision for the new timpani drums. I want to thank our executive director, Lindsay. And I really want to thank the very generous sponsor of the new set of timpani drums, Myra Montfort and Bill Runyon, who have been two fantastic supporters and sponsors of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra for decades. And without their support, we would not have these beautiful instruments that we have now. Tell us a little bit about the new set, where they come from. And you've already told us about the fine tuning and the special, crank handle for that, as well as the foot pedal. Just a little bit about the story about how you got them is kind of fun too.
Sure. Yeah. So I was kind of looking around to be totally transparent. Very, very nice new drums are even more expensive, like an insane amount. And it's mostly because the copper. So the bowls are pure copper, which is not a cheap material. And the fine craftsmanship, every really good set of timpani is handmade. So, the labor that goes into that, the materials, the fine machining, right? It's a very, I like it because they're very mechanical instruments, right?
Yeah.
In line with engineering. So this set, actually, the company that made it is not around anymore. It was made back, they're called Clevelanders. They're made, Cleveland orchestra, very good orchestra. That Cloyd Duff was the timpanist there for about 50 years. He was kind legend of timpani playing and his school of thought, you know. And the drums actually were made by one of his students, Paul Yamchich, and he's currently the principal timpanist with Cleveland Orchestra. And so they were made back in the 90s, early 90s. And I think they passed, you know, they were very well taken care of. They were probably originally played in Cleveland and then I think in Florida. And then they were sent to the shop in Michigan that it's called Precision Classic Timpani. And they kind of restored the drums a little bit. They were in good shape, but they, you know, made sure everything was good. And I went up there, I convinced, you know, William and Lindsay, I'm like, these are great drums. If we got it, let's go for it. You know, I went to that area, Kalamazoo, Michigan, in the middle of February during ice storm, rented a van and drove it back.
You personally rented a van and drove from Denver to Michigan to pick up these timpani and bring them back and then deliver them at the Civic Center. And there was a whole thing about that too. There was another show going on at the Civic Center. And
logistics were hard.
But logistics were hard. But thank you so much for doing that. I mean, you gave up a weekend of your life, and you know that what a difference it makes. These Clevelanders. I mean, also I think it's more special the fact that they're not making them anymore. I mean, I think their value is even going to go up. I mean, like you said, Cleveland Orchestra sound of timpani is legendary. I mean, Duff was. There's lots of stories about George Zell, the legendary conductor back in the day of the Cleveland Orchestra, him and Duff being in the hall just experimenting with the sound of the timpani and the right stroke and the right mallet and the right and you know, until they got it just right. And another really amazing tie-in is that Bill Runyon, who I mentioned, was he and his wife Myra Montfort gave most of the money for this new set of ours. He knew Duff, which is amazing.
Yeah,
that is amazing connection there. Yeah,
I'll have to pick his brain on that because not many people knew Duff. So
I know, right? I mean, so Duff is kind of like the Vic Firth of in that world of timpani playing, where Vic was in Boston and Duff was in Cleveland, and these instruments, what an incredible difference. Right from the very first time you played them, everybody could tell that they were so much more ringy and beautiful, and the tone and the pitch, like you said, it's just wow. And nice side note that our wonderful longtime partnership with LCCC, the community college in Laramie County Community College, we have a long-standing partnership with them, and they're wonderful partners with the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra, and we're grateful to them for purchasing our other set of timpani, which step up for them in their music department.
Totally.
It worked out so well. It was just great all around, win-win-win. So
yeah.
Thank you, Derek, for your leadership in seeing us to that point. We're getting that to happen, and I just can't wait to keep featuring you and the timpani more in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else you want to share with us before we sign off tonight?
No, I guess my message to any aspiring young musicians would be to, like I said before, practice a little bit every day, and that goes a really long way. It sounds hard, and the discipline it takes is difficult, but I would not be anywhere where I'm at today if it wasn't for consistent practice and obviously a great teacher. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Derek. You're a huge part of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. We're very grateful, very blessed to have you and your musicianship in the orchestra. And this has been such a fun and wonderful interview, and I can't wait to hear your piano recital that you're giving us tonight. Thank you so much, Derek.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. Oh, and another quick plug for our October 17th concert featuring the strings of the orchestra, including the Holberg Suite, which you heard part of tonight. Thank you, everyone. Good night.